From Washington, D.C., this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Hena Zuberi. Our top story tonight, President Biden's address. Biden spoke to the nation this afternoon. He says we must learn from our mistakes and we need to have a clear mission.
So we're left with a simple decision. Either follow through on the commitment made by the last administration and leave Afghanistan, or say we weren't leaving and commit another tens of thousands more troops going back to war. That was the choice, the real choice, between leaving or escalating.
He repeated to the terrorists, "We will not forgive or forget." Meanwhile, Taliban fighters on Tuesday took charge of Kabul's airport as the last American soldier flew out of the country. Here in the US, the image of the last soldier leaving Afghanistan dominated media coverage. Celebratory gunfire and fireworks lit up the night sky of Afghanistan's capital, Kabul. The Taliban say Afghanistan is a free and sovereign nation as they hailed the exit of US troops after 20 years of occupation. The group described the US departure as a historic moment. Taliban spokesperson Zabihullah Mujahid tweeted, "Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. Congratulations to all Afghans on the liberation and independence of Afghanistan from the American occupation. The last of American troops left the country." President Joe Biden thanked commanders and soldiers for their professionalism and resolve in evacuating 120,000 people. He said it was a unanimous recommendation of the Joint Chiefs and all of U.S. commanders on the ground to end the American airlift mission as planned. In related news, France and Britain on Monday failed to win UN backing for their proposal to create a safe zone around Kabul airport. The UN had requested the Taliban to honor a commitment to allow Afghans to leave the country and open Kabul airport securely. With American troops out of Afghanistan, the question now is, what should the US do with the money previously earmarked for Afghan security forces? That's the $6 billion question lawmakers are debating. One US-based peace group says the money should go towards helping save Afghan lives. Win Without War has launched a petition to convince Congress to do just that. The group says the funds should not be used to buy more military aircraft or bombs. Rather, they should help stave off a growing humanitarian crisis. Kate Kaiser, a policy director of Win Without War, says we owe the people of Afghanistan an immeasurable debt. She suggested evacuations, refugee resettlement, and humanitarian assistance are potential uses for the money. Alabama Republican Representative Mike Rogers is a ranking member of the House Armed Services Committee. He's amongst those seeking to redirect the funds towards counter-terrorism efforts. The U.S. has already spent $83 billion to train and equip the Afghan military and security forces over the past 2 decades. These forces no longer exist. Meanwhile, 66 Democratic lawmakers are urging the Biden administration to raise the refugee admissions cap to 200,000 next year. President Biden set the refugee cap at 62,500 this fiscal year. This was after facing backlash over plans to keep the earlier 15,000 person limit. In related news, Minnesota Democratic Representative Ilhan Omar said in an op-ed piece for CNN last week that President Biden deserves credit for evacuating more than 70,000 people from Kabul in the past week. However, she adds, tens and thousands more need help. Her office has received more than 5,000 requests from people trying to get family members and co-workers out of Afghanistan. When Afghanistan's capital city, Kabul, was about to fall to the Taliban earlier this month, Taliban in command gave America 2 options. The US could secure the city, or the Taliban would do it. Taliban offered Kabul to the US. American leaders in the country decided that the Taliban should take over Kabul. A Washington Post report describes the secret meeting between US military leaders and the Taliban. When Kabul began to collapse after Afghanistan's president Ashraf Ghani fled, US military officials met and struck a deal with the Taliban, the Post reports. As part of the deal, the US took control of Kabul's airport until Monday afternoon, when the last American troops left Afghanistan. Neither the Taliban nor the US anticipated Taliban would take control of Kabul so quickly. But the Post reports that someone had to step in amongst the chaos, and the US decided it should be the Taliban. According to leaked US Air Force documents, 90% of victims of drones are innocent civilians. The US drone strike on the night before the last US soldier left Afghanistan did just that, kill civilians. Here's more from Saleha Farouk.
Children, seeing their white Toyota Corolla in the Khaje Bogra neighborhood, ran towards it, and it was their last moment on this earth. It was also the last U.S. attack before the last of the American soldiers had left Afghanistan. An Afghan family of 10 with 7 children were obliterated. The driver, Zuberi Ahmadi, was an engineer and had worked for an American charity for 16 years. The whole family had special immigrant visa offered by the United States. They had packed all their belongings and were waiting for the word to be escorted to Kabul airport. But the message Washington sent instead was a rocket into their homes. It was late Sunday afternoon on August 29, 2021, in Kabul. The Defense Department said that it had blown up a vehicle laden with explosives. Anisa is the spouse of Zuberi Ahmed. He cared for his neighbors. He was in a foreign-run office. He had a flight to go to America today. Why are you lying to us? Where is Daesh here? His American organization agrees. They say that just a day before his death, he served meals to hungry women and children at a local refugee camp in Kabul. Here is Samia, the surviving daughter. Her wedding was set for coming Friday. Her fiancé, Ahmed Nasser, was however killed as well. Ahmed was a contractor with the U.S. military who was waiting to be evacuated. Samia says, "At first I thought it was the Taliban, but the Americans themselves did it." Samia said she staggered outside, choking, and saw the bodies of her siblings and relatives. "I saw the whole scene," she said. "There were burnt pieces of flesh everywhere." This is Arzu. She lost 3 small children to the drone attack. Here are some of the young victims in the extended family of 10. Here are 2 brothers, 5-year-old Armin and 3-year-old Binyamin. And here is 2-year-old Sumaya. Here's Faisal. He was 15 years old. This young man, Zamir, was 18 years old. Farzad was just 8 years old. Some sandals are left while dreams about America are gone. America says it will investigate. In the meantime, the war over the horizon is still on the horizon. American soldiers are gone, but peace is still not here.
A detailed analysis is coming up later tonight, so keep watching Muslim News. Should law enforcement agencies be allowed to keep cash and property confiscated in suspected drug crimes? Massachusetts lawmakers and criminal justice advocates are calling for changes to laws that govern how these agencies seize assets. A WBUR and ProPublica investigation found a top prosecutor stockpiling people's money for years. Money is kept even when people are not charged with a drug offense or their cases have been dismissed. Civil asset forfeiture was designed to disrupt criminal drug operations. But in Massachusetts, it's easier for prosecutors to hold on to seized cash indefinitely. Under that state's law, prosecutors only need probable cause to support suspicions the money was involved in a drug crime. The investigation found one district attorney's office waited years to tell people they could fight to get their money back. Most states require prosecutors to take action within 90 days of a seizure or the conclusion of a criminal case. A Colorado inmate's religious freedom lawsuit, which was previously dismissed by a federal judge, has been allowed to continue. The case was reopened after new information surfaced about the inmate's lack of access to food compliant with his religious beliefs. Sabir Shahbaz's lawsuit against the government alleges a failure to provide him with food that is halal or permissible under Islam. Shahbaz is being held at a maximum security prison in Florence, Colorado. He claims he signed up to participate in the Bureau of Prisons' religious diet program. However, he found his meals did not conform with Islamic standards. Shahbaz claims he was served foods containing excessive sodium or non-halal ingredients. He filed a First Amendment complaint in September 2019. He wants prison authorities to provide him with foods aligned with his religious beliefs. A group of evangelical Christian communicators has fired its top spokesman. Noted pastor and author Daniel Darling was fired over advocating for the COVID-19 vaccine. The vaccine is a contentious issue amongst evangelical Christians in the U.S. 43-year-old Darling appeared on MSNBC's Morning Joe program on August 18th, endorsing vaccination against COVID-19. Earlier, Darling took the same stance in an August 2nd op-ed piece in the USA Today. The Washington, D.C.-based National Religious Broadcasters has over 1,000 members, including America's best-known evangelical broadcast ministries and networks. In related news, Twitter has banned conservative author Alex Berenson for violating its COVID-19 misinformation rules. Berenson's account was suspended permanently for repeated violations, a Twitter spokesperson told The Hill. In a now deleted tweet, Berenson compared the vaccine to a therapeutic with a limited window of efficacy and terrible side effect profile. He also questioned vaccine mandates. A California parole board recommended Friday that the man who assassinated Robert Kennedy during his presidential campaign in 1968 be freed on parole. Sirhan is a Palestinian Christian who has spent more than 50 years in prison for the murder. The fate of the 77-year-old now rests in the hands of Governor Gavin Newsom, a Democrat who's facing a recall election. It was Sirhan's 60th parole hearing and the first time no prosecutor showed up to argue for his continued imprisonment. At the virtual hearing, Sirhan said he had little memory of the assassination itself. Shortly after midnight on June 5, 1968, Kennedy gave a speech at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles. It was after winning the California Democratic primary. The senator from New York walked through the hotel's pantry, where Sirhan shot him with a revolver. 5 other people around Kennedy were also shot, but they all survived. Kennedy died the next day, less than 5 years after his brother, President John F. Kennedy, had been assassinated. Sirhan said in a 1989 television interview from prison that he killed Kennedy because he felt betrayed by the senator's proposal to send 50 military planes to Israel. The London-based Institute for Strategic Dialogue's latest report found that the Chinese social networking platform, TikTok, operates as a new arena for violence endorsing hateful ideologies. The Institute aims to provide an in-depth analysis on the state of extremism and hate on TikTok. 3 months of research sampling over 1,000 videos posted on the platform in July found more than 300 clips promoting white supremacy and 81 videos promoting anti-Muslim hatred. More than 240 videos showed support for groups or individuals tied to extremism or terrorism. Researchers discovered videos portraying Muslims as supporters of terrorism and Holocaust denial clips. It also discovered users glorifying the mass shooters behind the 2019 Christchurch, New Zealand mosque massacres and the 2018 Pennsylvania Tree of Life synagogue attacks. the study found TikTok creators use coded language as well as the platform's video effects, layout, and music to promote hate. It highlighted that TikTok has a content moderation problem, and its enforcement gap is concerning. TikTok released a statement that it categorically prohibits violent extremism and hateful behavior. It pledged its team will remove any such content that violates its policies. 18 Palestinian demonstrators were wounded Sunday night in an Israeli crackdown. This happened near the eastern fence of the Gazan city of Jabaliyah, the Palestinian Health Ministry said. A group of Gazan youths began daily demonstrations Saturday in a different city across the besieged region. Protesters are calling for an end to Israel's 15-year siege on Gaza. Coming up next after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned and we'll be right back after these messages.
If I could be you, and you could be me for just 1 hour. If we could find a way to get inside each other's minds. Walk a mile in my shoes. Walk a mile in my shoes. Well, before you abuse, criticize, and accuse. Walk a mile in my shoes.
Despite the development of a COVID-19 vaccine, millions around the world will not have access. We need a vaccine that's free and available to everyone, everywhere. It's time for a people's vaccine.
The last of U.S. forces left Afghanistan, ending a 20-year presence. This has been the longest U.S. war seen, and it saw the death of over 300,000 people, including over 6,000 American soldiers and contractors. The final flight left Kabul airport a day earlier than projected. The Taliban, who fought the U.S., declared victory and are in full control of the Kabul airport. To discuss the complete withdrawal from Afghanistan, we have with us Matthew Ho. Matthew is a senior fellow at the Center of International Policy. He's a former Marine in Iraq and is a State Department, or was a State Department official in Afghanistan. Thank you so much for being here, Mr. Ho.
Thank you for having me.
So I wanted to first start off with your own personal feelings as you watched that final plane leave the Kabul airport.
Well, it's the feelings I have are simply anger and sadness. There's no celebration, even though myself and many others have been working for a long time to see this moment. Many people who are watching this program have been waiting for this moment for a long time, for the U.S. military occupation to end. There's no celebration. There's only feelings of sadness and anger. For myself, regret for having taken part in these wars. There's anger at what has occurred, what is continuing, what may come, sadness along those same lines. As well as frustration that so much of the United States right now, the focus is on the end of the war, as if August 30th, 2021 was the end of problems for the people of Afghanistan. It's the same type of problem you have when you say the war in Afghanistan starts on September 11th, 2001. It's incomplete and it's inaccurate. And I think there's frustration I have on that because the people of Afghanistan are in dire circumstances. They are already, before the Taliban takeover, they're the second most food insecure people in the world. More than 90% are below the poverty line. 70% live on less than $1 a day. It's a very desperate situation in Afghanistan. The war may not be over because there are still warlords who oppose the Taliban. So the situation for Afghans is a very difficult one. and none of us have crystal balls and can tell what will happen in the future. So there's also this great anxiety as well about what may come to pass.
Let's talk a little bit about the real cost of this war. There's been hundreds and thousands of lives that have been lost. But what have been other costs of this war?
Well, thank you for bringing it up, because it's something that gets said in passing in American media. And oftentimes the numbers are inaccurate, or baselines are very conservative. You'll hear quite recently that 170,000 Afghans have been killed in this war, and that's simply not true. Many times that I believe the estimates of the last 20 years of deaths in Afghanistan, along with Pakistan, because the two wars are so closely integrated in many ways. The reporting on deaths from credible sources, not from guys like me, but from universities, from medical journals like The Lancet, from journalists who have done a lot of research, is that you're looking at probably between 1 million and 2 million dead over the last 20 years in Afghanistan and Pakistan. All told, in the U.S. wars in the Muslim world, you're looking anywhere from 3 to 6 million killed in Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, all throughout Africa, Somalia, Libya, etc. So the consequences of this war have been catastrophic, and the suffering can't be quantified. The vast amounts of suffering, continues as Afghans have been subjected. At first, they were subjected under the Taliban to a theocratic, repressive government, and these last 20 years, they have been subjected to a predatory, kleptocratic government that is also repressive. And what will come with this new Taliban rule is still to be seen. It is unknown. So I think it's very difficult to talk about the costs, particularly for those of us here in the United States that are so far removed from it. We do know, in terms of U.S. costs, in terms of U.S. casualties, that I will say the entire number, because it's so difficult to separate the Iraq war from the Afghan war. Number of U.S. service members who were killed directly in the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan are more than 7,000. More than 8,000 contractors were killed in these wars. It's important to include the contractors, because in any previous wars, these were men and women who would be wearing military uniforms. As well as we know that more than 10,000 combat veterans have been killed by suicide since coming home as a direct result of the war. So you're looking at total U.S. deaths in these wars at approximately, at least 25,000. As well as the invisible wounds of these wars. More than 500,000 American veterans have traumatic brain injury as a result of these wars. That demonstrates the amount of violence that these wars, the amount of violence that was occurring in these wars. I mean, 500,000 men and women have come back home from the United States, had these traumatic brain injuries. Majority of those traumatic brain injuries have been caused by explosive blasts, because in these wars, because of body armor and vehicle armor, American soldiers were able to survive, basically walk away from explosions that in any previous war would have killed or maimed them. So we have hundreds of thousands of men and women who are suffering with traumatic brain injury. And if you go back to the Afghans, the Iraqis, the Syrians, etc., remember, those people didn't have body armor or vehicle armor. So the same must be said for the Iraqis, the Afghans, the Syrians, the Yemenis, that the cost is simply unquantifiable. In terms of dollar cost, it is trillions of dollars. Again, it's very hard to separate the Iraq war from the Afghan war. You can say that the Afghan war direct costs were $2.2 trillion, but that leaves out a lot. I mean, we know that just 5 American contractors, 5 American defense corporations received $2 trillion in the last 20 years alone. So there has been an explosion. People have profited greatly from these wars. The looting of the American treasury that occurred because of these wars is just simply astronomical. Even the amount of money that was spent on the Afghan reconstruction efforts, the $150 billion or so that was spent by the United States to supposedly rebuild Afghanistan, which of course was a colossal failure. That $150 billion, we know from the Special Inspector General for Afghan Reconstruction, who was congressionally appointed, that of that $150 billion, approximately 80% of that money never left the United States or returned to the United States. So there were plenty of people who profited, plenty of institutions and corporations that got powerful, saw their budgets expand, earned profits, et cetera. So that is one thing I think we can quantify, is how wealthy certain individuals and corporations became because of these wars.
Definitely. And I can tell you one cost that is often not either it's not quantifiable, but is often not noted, is the global Islamophobia that spread around the world because of these two wars post 9/11. How many Muslim children bullied in schools, how many hijabs pulled off. I mean, this is something that often does not get even tallied. And how many other countries have used this war on terror, Burma, China, India, and are persecuting their minorities. So, but as we go on, who do we hold accountable for this war? Has there, and you've worked for the State Department, is there any accountability inside the State Department? The experts who wrote the white papers on Afghanistan and Pakistan, where is the accountability?
There is no accountability. There's none. The only people who have been held accountable have been people who have spoken out against this war, who've tried to tell the truth of these wars. John Kiriakou, who went to prison for confirming the American torture program. The only person who was ever punished for the American torture program was John Kiriakou, the man who spoke out about it and exposed it. Daniel Hale, who is currently in prison now, a young man who took part in the drone program, and regrets and is ashamed of his participation in that drone program and trying to repent for his participation in it, leaked a trove of documents detailing what the United States drone program actually looked like, including the fact that the United States government knows that 90% of the people its drones kills are not intended targets, which means that they are civilians, they are innocent. These are the men these people are punished. Daniel Hale is in prison now because he told the world the truth about these wars, about these drones. Say the same for Chelsea Manning, the same for Julian Assange, et cetera, et cetera. And meanwhile, there is no accountability. And it's just not that these people in the government got this wrong, in the media got this wrong, the think tanks that are funded by the weapons companies and the fossil fuel companies and by foreign governments. Not just that they got this wrong and continually got this wrong, but they lied about it. This was a concentrated, systemic lying that occurred all throughout these wars to not only justify the wars, but not to the creation of these wars, the beginning of these wars, but to justify their sustainment and their continuity. So it's not only the fact that they got these wars wrong, but that they purposefully and willfully lied as part of a process to hide the wars, to hide the reality of the wars, and to cover up for the war's immorality and the shame that should actually befall the United States for these wars. So it's deeper than even holding accountable for being wrong. It's trying to keep people accountable for lying.
I also wanted to ask you, as you're watching this, what has the U.S. left behind in terms of arms and weapons? I know majority of the personnel have been pulled out, and there are some Americans, they said, that didn't make it to the airport in time for the cutoff date. What else has been left behind?
Gosh, the United States left behind so much in terms of military equipment that had been provided to the Afghan army and the Afghan police. You're talking about all kinds of vehicles, all kinds of weapons, not just small arms, but heavier weapons, helicopters. And this, of course, is now in the possession of the Taliban. Some of those items were made to be inoperable, such as some of the aircraft, but some were not. So the United States materially left behind quite a lot. But the United States often also left behind many of its allies. There are tens of thousands of Afghans who worked with the United States, who the United States made promises to that they would take care of, that they would assist, that they would not leave behind. And that's exactly what the United States has done. And that's not a consequence of the Joe Biden administration in these last few months. This issue with Afghan allies goes back to the Barack Obama administration. As early as 2013, veterans groups and human rights groups were saying, you have to do something about the people that are working for us in Afghanistan. And the United States government as a whole, Democrats and Republicans, Congress, the executive branch, the military, et cetera, simply failed out because they did not want to do anything to help these people. It's just that simple. If you have a process where people work with us, our military, where you have military officers, you have development officers, you have diplomats who would attest that, yes, these people work with us, these people would have given our lives for us, but then they have to go through an 850-day long process to get a visa, and hardly any of them are approved. That is just a question of will, and it shows the real intentions of the United States in Afghanistan was never to help the Afghan people. This was about expanding and maintaining the American empire and addressing, political opportunism for both Democratic and Republican presidents.
It's hard to talk about this war in many, many aspects, especially as a Muslim woman, and especially to see how Afghan women and Muslim women are treated like a trophy, right? To be won through these wars, this savior complex. And we're seeing it again. We're seeing this narrative again. Are you seeing it, and how do you respond to that?
Yes. And my question is, where were these people who were concerned about the Afghan women over the last 20 years? Like, there's no question the Taliban are brutal in their misogyny, in that what is befalling Afghanistan is a tragedy. But the last 20 years have been a tragedy as well. The United States brought into power the same warlords and drug lords that the Taliban disposed of. These were men that were brutal, criminal. They were war criminals as well as common criminals, but they were also incredibly misogynist. The human rights violation of the Afghan government over the last 20 years is absolutely legionary. The Afghan government, the Afghan government's misogyny may not have been as theatrical as the Taliban. They were not executing women in stadiums or stoning them in public, but they were still allowing forced marriages. They were still allowing men to rape their wives. They were still imprisoning women who were raped, rather than imprisoning the rapist. The misogyny was there, as well as a multitude of other human rights violations. The sexual abuse of children and the trafficking of children within the Afghan military and government, within these warlord circles, was not a rare occurrence. It's well documented that this was a common occurrence, that this was a systemic issue, this raping and trafficking of children. And U.S. military officers who tried to do something about it were actually punished by the U.S. military for trying to stop that child trafficking and child rape. In terms of other issues, between 1/3 and half of all Afghan government prisoners were tortured. So yes, the Taliban were awful. I am heartbroken for the Afghan people that this is the situation, the circumstances they are in, that basically they are back to where they were 20 years ago in many ways. Maybe not. We'll see. I don't have a crystal ball. However, the fact that the idea that somehow the last 20 years was a period of progress and human rights and just a golden era in Afghanistan is completely false. And, so the thing I ask to those who are speaking out for women now is, have you been speaking out for women for the last 20 years? Because many of them have not. Many of them have simply ignored the situation because it was convenient. This has to do with a lot of corruption within our own human rights organizations, because a lot of our own human rights organizations are not independent. They take money from the American government. They take money from European governments. They take money from American corporations that have interests in these wars. So you see many, even human rights organizations that were afraid to criticize the Afghan government for its own human rights abuses because that would conflict with the American narrative. And because if you conflict with that narrative, maybe you're afraid that your funding from the American government or American corporations will run dry. So I think there is a lot of blame to go around for the fact that the honest reporting, thorough reporting, holding the Afghan government accountable these last 20 years, there's a lot of blame to go around for why that was not done.
Final question. What's next? I recently saw a tweet about an American, I don't know the name of the plane, but it was a gigantic looking plane. And it's been seen in Pakistan, and questions on Twitter whether a new base was being formed in Pakistan to fight ISIS Khorasan in Afghanistan through Pakistan, or what is next? What's next for relations between U.S. and the Taliban, and what's next for Afghanistan and Pakistan?
Well, unfortunately, unless Joe Biden strikes a path of moral courage that I don't expect him to, the relations between the United States and Afghanistan will be totally dependent upon American public opinion and what is being said on the various cable media channels, et cetera. Joe Biden has taken a tremendous political beating for the Afghan war these last few months. He was entirely right to do what he did. But the problem now is that he appears weak. And will he now try and appear tough in future dealings with with Afghanistan, and in particular Taliban? Afghanistan is in a desperate situation, as said earlier. I mean, you're talking about a country that has no economy. The only industry is the narcotics trade. People, millions, the vast majority of people live subsistently. Afghanistan's federal budget, government budget, is sustained for the most part by outside aid. So Afghanistan and the Taliban need money to keep coming in. And if they do not receive that, if it is cut off or continues to remain cut off, the economic situation, which is already an economic collapse, basically, will only get worse. So there are two paths. One, there can be this cruel and bitter peace where the Taliban have won this phase of the war, and that brings a cessation of violence. There has been reporting that the Taliban are in communication with the warlords they are fighting in an attempt to negotiate some type of deal. And I hope that comes through, because as cruel and as unjust that is, at least it will stop the violence or diminish the violence greatly. And if you have a break in that cycle of violence, then you can have the opportunity to rebuild and reconcile. If you continue with this war, it will only look as it has the last 40 plus years in Afghanistan, with a few people profiting, a few people gaining from this war, and the vast majority of Afghans suffering. To your point about the possibility of the United States building a base in Pakistan, and absolutely, the American CIA has a long history with these warlords that are still fighting the Taliban. I can guarantee you that there are people in Washington, D.C. right now who are saying, look, the map of Afghanistan doesn't look much different than it did on September 11th, 2001. We were successful in taking the Taliban out of power back then. We can do it again. And in the great spirit, right, of American hubris, arrogance, and ignorance, we can do it better this time. So that is the danger the Afghan people face. Aside from this economic collapse, aside from being isolated from the world, aside from having no infrastructure, industry whatsoever, there's the very real danger that the Americans may decide through their CIA to continue the war via these warlords, which of course will just allow the last 40 years to continue new phases of violence and slaughter and destitution to occur. And we have to understand this, and I believe we were referencing this earlier, and you were in your comments in terms of that look, this war is one part of the larger American global war on terror, as it's called. You know, I prefer to call it the United States war in the Muslim world, because it stretches from West Africa all the way to Pakistan. And what you see, the way this war is conducted throughout, literally at least 15 countries, probably more. The United States uses secret forces. It uses CIA. It uses special operations. It uses drones. It uses contractors, because contractors are not accountable like the American government is. Contractors can do whatever they want, and no one can kind of provide oversight on them. And then finally, they use proxy. The United States uses proxy forces in Afghanistan. Throughout this war, these wars, these proxy forces, which are government forces and which are militias, and they are the ones who do the bleeding. They are the ones who do the bulk of the killing. And as long as it's not Americans being killed in these wars, the U.S. public doesn't notice, the Congress doesn't really care, and the American media doesn't publicize it, because as long as it's black people killing black people, brown people killing brown people, it doesn't matter to the majority of the United States. And it falls into that narrative, right? That really insipid, disgusting, obscene narrative that these people have been killing themselves, have been killing each other forever, which of course is completely untrue, and allows for the washing of hands of American responsibility and culpability in all these wars, many of them instigated by the United States, or if not instigated, certainly sustained by the United States.
Well, thank you so much for your time, Matthew. It was great talking to you, and hopefully we can have you back someday.
Thank you so much.
We're going to take a quick break before our next analysis segment, so stay tuned.
Our fellow Americans.
Right now, the COVID-19 vaccines are available to millions of Americans.
And soon, they will be available to everyone.
The science is clear. These vaccines will protect you and those you love from this dangerous and deadly disease.
They could save your life.
So we urge you to get vaccinated when it's available to you.
That's the first step to ending the pandemic and moving our country forward. It's up to you.
They took over my bedroom. Come on, come on. Okay, Dad. 1, 2, 3. Dad! You saved me. Dad?
Are you okay?
I'm fine, dear.
Your hero needs you now, and AARP is here to help. Find the care guides you need at aarp.org/caregiving.
Welcome back. Earlier in the show, we shared a package on a recent U.S. drone strike in Afghanistan. To discuss this in detail, let's go to Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid. He's being joined by an anti-war activist, Medea Benjamin. Over to you, Imam Mujahid.
Thank you, Hena. Today we have Medea Benjamin, a longtime peace activist, co-founder of Code Pink, who has been fighting against wars, especially against drone war. Welcome to Muslim Network TV.
Thank you so much for having me on.
Medea, you have been marching and fighting and raising slogans and demonstrating and interrupting presidents of the country to stop war. Are you happy today?
No, I'm not happy at all. I feel a mixture of sadness, anger, grief, regrets, certainly not happy.
So what is happening? Right now, U.S. has left. Taliban are in control. And Biden is being attacked for taking people out. This thing is going on for a while, right?
Most people are focusing on the horrors of the last 20 days and forgetting the horrors of the last 20 years, while the U.S. has been raining thousands upon thousands of bombs on the people of Afghanistan, continuing a war that has led to displacement of millions, misery, and I think rather than looking so much at how we could have done the exit better, which we should look at and criticize Biden for, we shouldn't forget that it was wrong to go into Afghanistan in the first place, and that these last 20 years, the United States has not been the, quote, good guy respecting human rights and international law, but has instead been an occupying force.
Madhya, in recent article, you have written that 80,000 bombs were thrown at Afghanistan. Where do you get these numbers?
We actually get it from the U.S. military's figure themselves. Until the last years of the Trump administration, they were publishing these figures publicly. Now it's harder to get them, but we take our statistics from the government itself. I think most people have no idea how many bombs we have dropped on Afghanistan. The fact that in our drone warfare, the vast majority of people who have been killed are not even the intended targets. Most Americans have no idea how many innocent Afghans have been killed. It was sad for me to watch the general yesterday when he was announcing that the last of the U.S. troops were leaving Afghanistan, and he talked with sadness about the American lives that had been lost. He didn't even mention the Afghan lives. So the Afghan people have certainly not been foremost in the minds of the occupying forces in Afghanistan. It's really been about U.S. interests. And when it was decided, and this is back in the Trump administration, that it was no longer in the U.S. interest to keep this occupation going, that's why the U.S. left, leaving the Afghan people to the Taliban and to the poverty and misery that they have been suffering for all too long now.
Has war, Madhya, really ended?
War has not ended for the Afghan people. In terms of the U.S. involvement, we know that the last U.S. military action was a drone strike that killed an entire family, including 6 of the children. This is a symbolic reflection of so many of the U.S. drone strikes that have been going on in the last 20 years and will probably continue to go on after the U.S. has, quote, ended its war, unless we put more pressure on the Biden administration to say ending the war means ending the airstrikes as well. But for the Afghan people, this is just an interlude in an ongoing war. We don't know if there will be major resistance to the Taliban that will strike up a civil war in Afghanistan. We don't know what the fate of the Afghan people under Taliban rule will be, but certainly the war is not over for the Afghan people.
In this last drone attack, 10 people were killed. And they were, one of the person who was driver was actually a military contractor for the U.S. government. And his soon-to-be son-in-law, who also was killed, was also working for a charity. And they were waiting for the call to get on the plane to America. So there were no ISIS sympathizers, But who decides, Madhya, who to kill?
The Biden administration says that it is revising its rules on the use of drones, but that they haven't come up with the answer yet. In the meantime, it is an indication of whoever is in charge does not have the welfare of innocent Afghans foremost in their mind. I must say that I myself felt somewhat conflicted when I heard about this drone strike initially, because it was portrayed that this was a car on its way to blow up people at the airport. And I thought, well, I'm against drone strikes, but I must think that perhaps this was a case where there was an imminent attack and the US was trying to stop a much greater danger. But then the more you learn about it, the more you realize that this car perhaps wasn't even full of people wanting and explosives. We don't even know that yet. And certainly, this is one example where a drone strike happened in Kabul, where the journalists can get to and try to get to the bottom of this. But most of the drone strikes are in remote rural areas where there are no journalists that are able to get to the bottom of it. And so we have been fed a series of government propaganda about the drone strikes being so precise and killing the enemy targets, when all along we either have no idea who is really killed, or we have been sheltered from knowing all of the innocent people who have been killed. And let's also remember that in the killings that the US has been doing for these last 20 years, so many families have been affected by that. And it is a recruitment tool for the Taliban or for ISIS or for Al-Qaeda or for any of these extremist groups. So the fact that the US is out, we have to make sure that we do not continue with this campaign of killing people from thousands of miles away in the luxury of air-conditioned rooms by pressing buttons with no accountability for who it is we actually kill.
How many people, Madhya, do you know? I mean, is there statistics how many people have been killed through drone strikes?
There are statistics that some reporters groups and investigators have tried to come up with, but they fall short of the true costs, because it is so hard to get to these areas. And we're not just talking about Afghanistan. We have the issue of Yemen, for example, where a lot of these drone strikes are in very remote areas. So it has been very difficult to get real numbers. We know they are in the thousands, but we certainly will never get a full accounting for how many people have been killed. And there's also this issue of innocent people versus militants. And I will never forget having been in the home of a woman in Yemen whose 3 sons were killed by drone strikes and were indeed militants of Al-Qaeda, when she said to me they were 17, 18, and 20 years old. They were against our government, at that time a dictatorship in Yemen. They were stupid to join a group, Al-Qaeda, that was fighting the government, but itself was a terrible group. I told them not to, but they went anyway. And she turned to me and said, aren't there teenagers in your country that get involved with the wrong gang? Would you like them to be killed by a foreign bomb, or would you like them to be arrested and jailed and re-educated? So even when we look at the number of, quote, militants killed, let's think that most of them are young people, most of them not knowing what they are really fighting for, and many of them just going as a way to earn some money because they are desperately poor. So whatever way you characterize the people that we've been killing, it certainly has been not the right way to deal with conflict. And let's hope that there will be some reflection now after 20 years of doing this to say it just doesn't work.
Are there enough conversation about it in the US think tanks that drone strikes will not work, or is it still the realm of the peace movement to talk against the drone strikes?
I am worried that now that the US has pulled its troops out of Afghanistan, that many Americans will say, okay, we don't mind using drone strikes against our enemies because no Americans will be killed. And that's the problem of not uplifting the victims of our policies and not showing their humanity. So I think there's a big job left for us to do to be educating people that drone strikes are illegal. They're a form of extrajudicial assassination, but also to be educating the American people that it is actually creating more enemies of the United States and jeopardizing our national security. But unfortunately, the mainstream media doesn't talk about it in these terms. So we have a lot of work to do in the peace movement.
Maria, you mentioned that illegal. Under which law these things are illegal?
Well, there's the issue of humanitarian law, and there's the issue of the laws of warfare. And under all of these laws, unless you are being attacked, unless you are in danger of an imminent attack, it is not legal. Of course, the US twists and turns what is a, quote, imminent attack. But we know now that the people that we are killing overseas, the vast majority of them have no interest in attacking the United States. They might be interested in attacking US soldiers, but if US soldiers aren't there, then they're not in jeopardy. So the best thing we can do to stop ourselves from being the victims of an imminent attack is to not be thousands of miles away in other people's countries. We have over 800 US bases around the world where the many of the host countries don't want us there. And certainly many of the people in those host countries don't want us there. So wouldn't this be a marvelous time to be thinking about the role of the United States in the world and to say it's time to reduce our military footprint and to close the majority of these bases and really use our military for defense, not for aggression.
Well, thank you so much, Madhya Benjamin, for being with us.
Thank you for giving me this opportunity.
Back to you, Hena.
Thank you so much, Imam Mujahid. That's all from our Washington studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube and Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network News or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.